Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I want to go over estates and interests, that unit in my textbook. The reason I want to go over that is because that unit kind of has like several different vocab terms, several different things that I guess kind of go together. So that's the reason we're going to go over that today. I'm going to break everything down and I'm going to make everything as simple as I can to understand as always. Before we begin, I did want to give you guys a quick little update. So I have in fact went out with my first buyer. I showed my first buyer around. We actually hit 3 different houses that day and I went totally by myself. I am going to be making a video most likely next week or the week after updating you guys on exactly how it went. So please stay tuned for that. And also before we begin, please make sure to like and subscribe because it really helps my channel out. I will be sharing everything that I learn with you guys, so please stay tuned. And I will also put the prep agent link down below with my discount code. Okay, let's get started. So in my textbook, the first thing I want to go over with you guys is estates. And in my textbook, it's kind of like 4 of them kind of grouped together. And then we have a couple other examples of different estates under it. So I guess that's the way I'm going to explain it to you guys right now. So an estate for years is basically created by a lease. But the point is with this lease is an estate for years, do not get confused by it saying years. An estate for years basically means that it has a start date and it also has an end date. So an estate for years could be like 4 weeks. Like you're going to move in April 1st and you need to be out by May 1st. That's an estate for years because that has a specific start date. It could be weeks, it could be months, it even could be years. Do not get confused and do not assume that an estate for years means it has to be years. It does not have to be years. The point is an estate for years has a start date and a stop date. Then the next thing we have is a periodic estate. So a periodic estate is basically could be a month-to-month agreement and every 6-month agreement, a yearly agreement. But the point is there's not exactly a definite time that you have to leave, but the point is you speak to the landlord over and over again, whether it be every month, every 2 months, every 6 months, every year. You renew with the landlord every certain amount of time. And with a periodic estate, if you actually wanted to leave, there's no definite time that you have to leave. As long as you and your landlord renegotiate the deal every 6 months or whatever it is, there's no specific time that you have to leave. But if you wanted to leave, you would have to give the landlord that much notice. So if you have a month-to-month agreement, you'd have to give him a month's notice before you can leave, or 6 months notice before you can leave. It's whatever your agreement is. Every time you renew, that's how long you would have to give as notice. Then we have something called a tenancy at will. So a tenancy at will is there's literally no amount of time specified. The tenant can literally leave whenever they want. There is no specific amount of time specified or any kind of month to month or 6 month to 6 month, anything like that set up. The tenant can literally stay there as long as they want and literally leave whenever they want. That is a tenancy at will. And lastly, we have a tenancy at sufferance. So a tenancy at sufferance is when a landlord has a tenant that is not discussing anything with them, is not paying them, and literally won't leave. Maybe their lease or their terms ended and now the tenant did nothing to like reach out to the landlord, negotiate a new contract or a new lease, negotiate trying to pay. They're literally just staying there, and it's called a holdover tenant when they just stay there without even paying or even making an attempt to contact the landlord and explain their case. So a tenancy at sufferance or a holdover tenant is a tenant that is overstaying their welcome. They will not leave. So those are the 4 that I have grouped together. And then we have other kinds of estates. So we have like a life estate, a leasehold estate, or a fee simple estate. Those are 3 that you should definitely know for the test. So we will start with the best one. The best one out of the 3 is a fee simple estate. A fee simple estate means that you have complete rights and complete control of the estate, of the property. It is 100% yours. You can give it to whoever you want. You can live there as long as you want. You don't answer to anyone because you completely own it. That is a fee simple estate, and that is the best estate to have. Then we have life estate. So a life estate is different from a fee simple estate because you can technically live there forever. You can live there for your entire life. You can live there for a specific amount of time if you want. But the point is, when you pass away, you don't own it technically. You don't own it, so you can't pass it along to anyone else. You can't give it to anyone else. When you die, your ownership dies with it. A fee simple estate, it is technically yours, so you can give it to whoever you want after you pass away, but you can't do that with a life estate because your ownership dies with you. And then lastly, we have a leasehold estate. So all a leasehold estate basically is it's a lease. You have the right to occupy a space for a certain amount of time. It's a lease. And with that being said, I'm now going to go into some different kinds of leases that you could have besides the ones I just mentioned. So you could have something called a gross lease. So a gross lease is basically you, the tenant, you just pay your rent and that is it. Most of the time now, if you have a lease, you probably pay something else with it, right? You probably pay like your water bill or your heat or something. You don't literally just pay your rent. A gross lease is you just pay your rent and literally nothing else. The next thing we have is a net lease. So a net lease is you pay your rent plus some other expenses, like you might pay some utilities, water, gas, whatever it is. You have your rent that you pay for, and then you also pay some additional expenses on the property, which is basically like the most normal kind of lease there is nowadays. Most people don't just pay their rent. A triple net lease. So a triple net lease, unlike a net lease, a triple net lease is actually you pay for everything. You literally pay for everything. You pay for taxes, you pay for insurance, you pay for repairs if there's any repairs that need to be done while you're living there. You pay for everything except the mortgage. The mortgage is not your problem, but everything else that comes with living in that unit for that amount of time is your problem. So that is a triple net lease. You pay for everything except the mortgage. Then we have something called a proprietary lease. A proprietary lease is co-op specific, and it means that you have the right to occupy a space for a certain amount of time. You have an occupancy agreement, so you're allowed to live there for a certain amount of time. That's what a proprietary lease is. It's not much different from a regular lease or regular leasehold estate. It's just this is co-op specific. And then lastly, we have a percentage lease. So a percentage lease is for commercial buildings basically because you pay your rent, right? Like let's say we have some random store, like we have like a Target or something like that. They have to pay their rent and then they also have to give the landlord a certain amount of their profits as well. So that's a percentage lease. So I also wanted to mention that Statute of Fraud states that if you have a lease that is over 1 year long, then it does in fact need to be written down to be enforced. But if you have a lease that is literally less than a year long, it does not have to be written down. Verbal is fine. If you verbally agree to a lease and it's less than 1 year, it can be enforced. So with that being said, then I want to go into actual eviction and constructive eviction. So actual eviction is when the tenant breaches the contract. So therefore the landlord is allowed to take them to court to regain possession. So that's an actual eviction. Then we have a constructive eviction. So a constructive eviction is when the landlord breaches the terms. And the way the landlord can breach the terms is they can't shut off the heat on you in the middle of winter. That would make the apartment unlivable. So if they make the apartment unlivable and you feel like you have to move out, they have to provide you somewhere comfortable to live while you're living there. That will be a constructive eviction. The landlord breached the terms of the contract. The tenant can now take them to court. Okay, so the next group of terms that I want to go over while we're talking about estates is probate, intestate, and escheat. So probate is if someone passes away and they have a will, you have to prove the will valid in court. So that is what probate is. You have to go to court to make sure the will is valid or to make the will valid. Then we have intestate. And intestate is someone passes away without a will. So if they don't have a will, who is their stuff going to? Where is it going after they pass away? So to answer that question, escheat is if someone passes away and they have no will, or maybe their will's not valid for whatever reason, any property, any estates that they have is going to be taken back by the state. Okay, so now I want to go over another 3 things that have to do with estates and ownership. So we have joint tendency, tendency in common, and then we have tendency by entirety. And the way I want to explain this to you guys is joint tendency and tendency by entirety. Those are almost the same because both of them have something called right to survivorship. So right to survivorship means that all the parties involved basically have like an equal share of the property. And if one of them passes away, that share gets divided equally amongst anyone else who is left. So tendency by entirety is used for marriage. So both people in the marriage will have rights to survivorship. So if one person passes away, that person's share now goes to the other person, the person that is still alive. They gain that person's share. They passed away. They gained that person's share of whatever the property was. That remaining person now has rights to the entire property. And then the difference is joint tenancy. Joint tenancy is the same thing, except they don't have to be married. It could be more than two people in it. So the point is, if someone in that group, if it could be two people, it could be three people, if someone passes away, that person's share, equal share, now gets divided between the rest of the people that are still alive, because that's what rights to survivorship means. Every single person gets an equal share, and then if someone passes away, that share goes to the rest of the people in the joint tenancy or the tenancy by entirety. Even if they have a valid will that says they want their share of the property to go to an heir, they can't do that. If they have a joint tenancy or a tenancy by entirety, their share now goes to the rest of the group or the other person that's still alive. It doesn't matter what their will says. So joint tenancy could be 2 or 3. It could be friends. It could be unmarried people. It could be relatives. They each have an equal share. And then if someone passes away, their share gets divided to the rest of the people who are still alive in the agreement. Tenancy by entirety is between 2 married people. They both have right to survivorship. So if one of them passes away, the remaining person gets their entire share. So those two are more similar. The one that's the most different is tenancy in common. So tenancy in common is a group of people could all have unequal shares. So a tenancy in common, people can have unequal shares in property. And then if someone passes away, because there's no right to survivorship, if someone passes away, they are allowed to give their share of the property to an heir, unlike the other two. They are allowed to give it to an heir despite whatever the group said, as long as they have a valid will. So all you need to remember is tenancy in common is no right to survivorship. They can give their portion to an heir. But the other two do have right to survivorship. By entireties, people in marriage, and joint tenancy could be a group of people. Okay, and to wrap this up, I want to go over a couple of different vocab terms, just stuff I also saw in the chapter that I do remember seeing, so I want to go over that with you guys. So the first thing I want to get into is we have a fixture and then we have a trade fixture. So a fixture is basically a piece of personal property that kind of became permanently attached to the land. So what does that mean? So we know personal property is like your clothes. If you have a tractor, you can obviously bring the tractor with you to your next house, your car, things like that. That's personal property. That's stuff that you can take with you. But basically, personal property becomes a fixture when it gets permanently attached to your property. So what's an example of a fixture? If you buy kitchen cabinets for your house, but then you move, I'm sure you're not going to take the kitchen cabinets with you, right? So that ends up becoming a fixture. It's your personal property that now became permanently attached to the house. Then we have something called a trade fixture. A trade fixture is basically something that you add to the space that you're renting for business purposes. So let's say you want to sell chicken eggs, so you get a chicken coop, or you're a hairdresser, so you add like a salon chair and a salon mirror to the space that you're renting. The only thing with the trade fixture, unlike a regular fixture, is the trade fixture, because it's for business, you have to make sure that whenever it's your time to leave or whenever your lease expires, you have to take all that business stuff with you. So that's the difference. If you have a chicken coop, you have to take it with you. If you have a salon chair and a salon mirror, you have to make sure you take that stuff with you. So that's the difference between a trade fixture and a regular fixture. A regular fixture is personal property that now has to stay there, became permanently attached to the building. But trade fixture is for business purpose, so you do have to take it with you whenever it's your time to go. And then the last thing that I wanted to go over today is illiquidity. So illiquidity basically means, let's say you're on a crunch for money, so you want to try to sell an asset really quick. It's going to be hard to sell something for the full value that it's worth if you're kind of like in a crunch for money. You're trying to sell it as fast as possible. When people put their house up on the market and they're taking their time, they're in no rush, they're more likely to get market value for it because they're going to take their time and wait for the best offer to come. But illiquidity is basically you're having a hard time getting full market value for it because you're short on time to sell. So yeah, those are just some terms that I want to go over that are also in this chapter that you could see on the text. Thank you for watching. Please comment any questions you have down below. I appreciate you guys so much. I'm really happy with the way this channel is growing. I have a lot of great stuff, great advice, great tips coming for you guys. guys, so please make sure to subscribe. A reminder once again that I will put my prep agent link with the discount code down below. You can email any questions you have. I love hearing from you guys. And that's it, guys. Take care. I'll see you next week.